to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:30, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. May I please ask for a roll call?
Supervisor Riley?
Present.
Clerk Hanselby?
Present.
Treasurer Epperson?
Present.
Trustee Erda Thompson?
Present.
Trustee Jaffer?
Present.
Trustee Braybeck? Trustee Mills?
Present.
Madam Supervisor, we have 6 members present.
Thank you. We do have a quorum, and I will go ahead and ask for an approval of the agenda.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the agenda for July 9th, 2025.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the agenda is approved as presented. I will go ahead and call for public comment number 1. Any person may come forward at this time to address the board. Anyone who wishes to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Tom Carm. This is a follow-up as to the May 29th meeting regarding short-term rentals. I'm still not aware of any plan or intent or resolution by Pittsfield regarding that meeting or the issues on the table with that meeting. I contacted Chris, the building director, prior to that, already on April 7th. So he had the information as far as the intent of the builder at that point, and I gave him the littleblueporch.com address to verify that intent. That seems to be one of the main issues, is intent. It's my understanding that Trish feels that there's nothing we can do with intent. Jessica was so led to call the owners or speak to the owners. I don't know what conversation it was, call or in person, but inform them they could not have the rent by the hour in their advertisement because that put it as a commercial property. And she obviously knew that was their intent. So even though Chris said my information was wrong when I spoke to him, I found it puzzling that he had given a permit to the same owner, which was an LLC, as the Blue Lagoon, the adjacent property in that subdivision of that property lot that is set up to become rental units. But nonetheless, if he didn't know that when he set that up, he had that information when I spoke to him after the 7th. So he did recommend that I do a FOIA, which I did, which gave me the information about the zoning, the driveway permit. Well, not really the building of the driveway permit. That didn't come with my FOIA, but we did finally get that. The building permit, the occupancy, all those things indicate that the property on Hickory Hollow that's being built is for a single residency, single family. You can check the exact wordings. You have that in your records. Thank you. But to this date, like I said, I do not know Pittsfield's intent, and that brings me back to intent. I've always been of the understanding that this could be resolved, but I seem to have run up to some opposition. And all my years working for the county and as a professional, I feel it's best to resolve and find resolution if you know what both sides want, to know what they both want, what their intent is. I don't know that from Pittsfield at this point. But I want to make it clear what I want. It is my understanding that if a commercial structure is built under a residential permit, it likely violates both the permit and the zoning regulation. You're welcome to challenge that or prove that wrong. I think you won't. And after my research and consultation, it is my understanding The building official may revoke a permit based on false statement or misrepresentation. I am requesting that that happens now, and this no longer drags on any further. Because the other intent that I don't know is if it does drag on, what happens when that opens as a rental property? Who from Pittsfield is going to be there to tell them, no, you can't come in and use this property even though you reserved it and have paid money? Because that's what will happen if it goes that far. So let's avoid that and resolve it now. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to come up and speak at this time? Okay, I'll open it up to any board comments or feedback. I would like to just say that we are working with our attorney, and we are working on short-term rental ordinance draft that will be going to the Planning Commission in July, at the next meeting in July, I believe. So we are looking to resolve this, and we are making sure we're looking at all the legal aspects of it. So,
Thank you.
okay.
Excuse me.
Is it going to be a rental, or is it going to be sold as a residence?
We don't have the back and forth. We can have a conversation at the end of the meeting. We don't really have the back and forth. I will just say that that is a whole separate issue we're working with on with the legal counsel. So.
What I just stated was not about short-term rentals. This was about the Hickory Hollow address with wrong zoning, wrong permits. It's a different issue.
Yep, and we can talk about that in a different setting, and I know there's a correspondence coming from Director West's office regarding that, so, yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Seeing no more public comment, we will go ahead and move on to, sorry, looking at there, approval of the minutes. May I have a motion, please?
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes of the regular meeting held on June 11th, 2025.
Second.
Okay, any comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Okay, moving on to proclamations. We have 6.1, a proclamation to appreciate Teresa A. Watkins. Yeah, yeah. Yes, I'm happy to.
So, this is a proclamation of appreciation to Teresa A. Watkins for her service to the residents of Pittsfield, Township on July 9, 2025. Whereas Tracy Watkins began her educational journey at Washington Community College, graduating in 1986 and
don't think we can thank Tracy enough, so
It's not possible.
there's no words, there's no words. I know that previous administrations feel the same way for sure, so there's no question there. Oh, I left my glasses over there. Very fast.
In your phone.
Yeah, my phone. All right. I don't believe we have any communications, so we'll go right to approval or a motion for the approval of the consent agenda.
Madam Chair, I move to consent agenda 8.1 to 8.11.
Any discussion?
A second.
Oh, second, sorry. Second?
I seconded.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, consent agenda is approved. Moving on, I don't think we have anything from the treasurer or clerk. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then we'll go to items from the supervisor. Can I ask for a motion on 11.1?
Madam Supervisor, I move to approve 11.1, adopt a resolution to amend the 2025 General Fund Budget, 2025 Public Safety Fund, 2025 800 MHZ Fund, and the 2025 FEMA Fire Fund. Resolution number 25-17, page
That's it.
58.
Second.
All right, I hear the second. I hear the second. I think Yami got the second.
Yeah.
And we do have our Director of Public Safety here, Pat Gray, if anyone has any questions regarding this.
No.
I think it's pretty straightforward, so I will go ahead and ask for a roll call on this one.
Supervisor Riley?
Yes.
Clerk Anzaldi?
Yes.
Treasurer Epican?
Yes.
Trustee Ernie Thompson?
Yes.
Trustee Jaffer?
Yes.
Trustee Braybeck?
Yes.
Trustee Mills?
Yes.
Madam Supervisor, you have 7 yeas.
Thank you. Resolution is approved. May I please ask for a motion for 11.2?
Madam Chair, move to approve the purchase of one 2025 Chevrolet Equinox from Tom Wetzel Buick GMC Chevrolet for the Police Department through My Deal Purchasing Program for a cost not to exceed $29,160.
Second.
Okay, any discussion on this one? Again, we do have the director here. All right. If I could go ahead and I guess all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. The purchase is approved. Moving on to 11.3.
Madam Supervisor, I move to authorize the payment to Allied Union Services for printing and mailing the 2024 Drinking Water Quality Report for a cost not to exceed $5,585.52.
Support.
Okay. Any discussion on this one? We do have our Director of Utilities, Billy, is it Wayland? Is it Wyland? Wyrick, sorry. It's not either of those. I always just call him Billy, so I'm like, wait, yeah, and then it's like, Kurt's name is close. All right. But he's here to answer any questions on that. It's pretty straightforward. We're mailing out information about the quality of water, obviously. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Authorized. Moving on to 11.4.
Madam Chair, move to authorize the supervisor and clerk to enter into a service agreement with TJ's Service Incorporated for 2 curbside vacuum leaf collection dates at the Oak Hill subdivision for fall 2025 for a cost not to exceed $14,850, subject to the township attorney approval. Support.
Okay, and this one I'm going to ask you to come up and talk to, because this one's a little more complicated, and those who were on the board previously may remember this one, but I want you to have a little background before we move forward with this one.
Okay. Good evening, Board. So, what we have here is essentially a compromise that we came up with several years ago. We had a issue at Oak Hills subdivision, which is on the corner of Merritt and Carpenter. So it's an old, mature subdivision that is technically in the town, well, it's in the township, but it's still very rural. Dirt roads, gravel roads throughout the entire subdivision, so they treat it very rural. Lots of mature trees. So when the township approved the 2011 the open burn permits, and now excluded them from burning. It was never enforced until about 2018, I believe. And in 2019, 2019 is when it was enforced by the township, by the fire marshal. And that's when we started to get tons of calls. They have mature trees, but they have no way of handling them. So township was asked to put together a solution to work with the residents to see if we could find something. And we came up with the vacuum collection, which is where they rake it to the curbside, to the ditch, and then it's vacuum collected. We'd like to sunset that program at the end of this year, but we want to give the residents one more year. Excuse me. Sorry. We want to give them one more year to sunset that project.
That makes sense. So, yeah, I get the board, and I think some of you were here to give a little background on that as well, is that it was a kind of a compromise, but it's really not the best compromise because we're, as a township, paying over $14,000 every year for this one subdivision. We're going to work with the community to see about, do you want maybe an SAD? Do you want, the director here has been able to get the contractor to work directly with the residents. So if they want to pay extra for that, but in the meantime, giving them a year, not just taking it away from them. But I think that's something that we should be spending extra in one subdivision.
Yes, and I would just like to say, I was here, and it was a hardship for a lot of the residents. I mean, they talked about, like, how many bags they had, and there were quite a few, and they have been burning for a very long time, and we don't want them to burn. So it was a compromise. It was a little bit hard to swallow, so I'm really glad that we're looking at this again, because although I feel for the residents in that subdivision, you know, it's hard not to say that other residents go.
Right. It sets a precedence, and other communities will have maturing trees coming along, and that kind of expense is something the township really can't take on.
Exactly. So I am glad, though, that you're not just cutting off that we are taking, like, the time to, like, hey, this is support. I think an SAD is actually an excellent idea, and that way it's uniform, and we kind of sort of manage it in so far as it goes on their taxes, they get billed for it, we pay the contractor for it. We have SADs all throughout the township, street lights or road SADs or whatever. So, yeah, I like this.
Yeah, so ultimately, we'd like to leave it in their court for their ownership of it. If it's an SAD or if they work directly with TJs, we'll continue to be the liaisons to TJs for them, but we won't foot the cost.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
Madam Chair, I live close to that neighborhood, and when they were burning, it affects the area, not just right on their corner. And there are some neighbors in there still burning, and I know a lot of neighbors don't want them to burn because they're asthmatic and so forth. And it'd be nice to work with them to have that resolved, and they can just pay for other taxes. That would be a great way. But we've got to watch them because they won't do it, and they'll continue to burn. Because I know we have individuals in there that are reluctant and want to just burn.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for helping pave the way to find a compromise here.
We appreciate it. Anything else?
All right. If no more discussion, I'll go ahead and ask, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that's approved. All right, moving on to 11.5.
Madam Chair, move to authorize the supervisor and clerk to enter into a traffic control device agreement with Washtenaw County Road Commission for the mid-block crossing at Bella Strata, Tiger Lily Drives, and Ann Arbor Saline Road, subject to township attorney approval.
Second.
All right, any discussion on this one? I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but we do have our Director of Community Development here as well to answer any questions. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes as well. Moving on to 11.6.
Madam Chair, I move to authorize payments to West Michigan Office Interiors for the installation of 2 workstations and cable runners for data cabling rearrangement for the workstations for a cost not to exceed $16,287.35, including contingencies.
Support.
Okay, any discussion on this? We do have our building director here as well this evening. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, 11.6 passes. And we're moving on to new business.
Madam Chair, I move to adopt,
No, we're good.
Madam Chair, I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the 2025 capital improvement bond, limited tax general obligation, resolution 25-18.
Support.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask Tom Colos to come up and speak with a few words on this.
Great. Well, good evening. Tom Coles with Miller Canfield. We are bond counsel to the township, and you may recall back in February, the board took the first step in issuing the bonds where we adopted a notice of intent resolution, published a notice in the paper indicating the township's intent to issue bonds for the project, which includes both the public safety facility and some improvements to sewer lift stations throughout the township. So this is the next step where we're actually authorizing the issuance of the bonds. So the resolution is rather lengthy. I won't read it. It'll take longer than the proclamation, but I'll just hit some of the highlights. So it's a 17-page resolution, but almost 2/3 of that is basically forms. So what it basically authorizes is issuance of a series of bonds and not to exceed $15 million to finance the project as we defined it with respect to both the public safety facility and the sewer lift stations. It establishes that the bonds are basically the limited tax full faith and credit of the township supports the bonds. So again, as a bondholder, I'm basically looking to the general fund to be support, but the township can use whatever funds it has necessary to pay back that service on the bond. So you can account for it within the township's finances. You don't have to, it doesn't all have to come from the general fund. So you can account for that separately with the different parts of the project. It establishes a debt retirement fund and a construction fund. So once we sell the bonds, at the closing, the township's going to get all of the bond proceeds at once, and it's going to go into your construction fund, where you will earn interest on that. That interest can be used to finance project costs. And we'll want to track the earnings of that and also the expenditure of those funds, because they can only be used for project purposes. Again, to the extent that this deal ever gets audited by the IRS in the future, we'll have those records to be able to support that it was used for project purposes, to pay contractors, and also they'll want to know what was earned on the interest so that if there's any arbitrage restrictions with respect to that. And also, again, it provides the form of the bond, so if you actually want to see what the bond looks like, that form is authorized in the resolution. It also provides that the bonds will be sold pursuant to a competitive sale. What that means is we'll publish a notice in the Bond Buyer, which is a national publication that indicates that the township will receive bids on this particular date at this particular time. And then once bids are received, to the extent the township wants to accept any of the bids, it has to take the lowest bid that produces the lowest true interest cost pursuant to state law. So the township doesn't have the ability to negotiate with the second or third bidder if they happen to be someone local. You're taking the lowest true interest cost under this particular method. Now, you could reject all the bids and decide to negotiate with an individual investor later on, but us and your financial advisor probably wouldn't recommend that method, because then if you ever wanted to sell bonds again, the market would realize that, well, why would we do this if you're going to go ahead with just the local bidder at some point? But that doesn't prohibit the local bidder from bidding, of course, the local banks from bidding. It delegates to certain of the township officials the ability to award the bonds to the bidder whose bid produces the lowest true interest cost. So again, it's really kind of a administrative act, because we're setting the parameter that, as long as it's the lowest true interest cost bidder, then the authority is only to award to that particular bidder. So instead of coming back to the board and timing the sale of the bonds to a board meeting, because that'll provide less flexibility to the market and when you actually sell the bonds. That's why we do this kind of delegation and allow them to be authorized and awarded pursuant to the parameters set out in the resolution. A couple other things just to wrap it up. These bonds will be tax exempt, so there's a covenant in the resolution that says the township will do everything in its power to maintain the tax exempt status of the bonds. What that really means is you're going to use the bond proceeds for their intended purposes. So we're financing a public safety facility that'll be used by the township for its own purposes, and of course, improvements to the sanitary sewer system. So there's really no opportunity to have any private individuals get the benefit out of those other than the people that are within your community. So as long as those proceeds are used for those purposes, there should be no issues in maintaining the tax exempt status of the bonds. Finally, it authorizes entering to something that's called a continuing disclosure undertaking. So we're selling these bonds out to the bond market. They're going to be up to $15 million, and so we're going to sell them to one investor who's then going to return, and they're going to sell them to their individual customers. They're basing their purchase based off of an offering document that has all the information that an investor needs to make an informed investment decision. So it has information on the bonds themselves, when's principal and interest paid, what's the security, can the bonds be called early by the township? But there's also a full appendix on the township itself. So if I knew nothing about Pittsfield Township, if I was an investor out of California, that information would provide, that appendix would provide financial information about the township. What's your taxable value look like? What's your tax rates look like? Who are your major taxpayers? What types of, how do your tax levies and collections? Because we're pledging taxes to support debt service on the bonds, it has a lot of the tax information, the tax base information that an investor would want to know to understand what the township's fiscal stability. Obviously, the bonds are going to be rated by an independent rating agency, so they're going to look at that very carefully and say, okay, what's the rating on the bonds? What does Standard & Poor's think the likelihood that I'm going to get repaid based on the pledge of the security in connection with the bond? So what this document does is, so when we send this out to the market, it's going to have completely up-to-date information, your most recent audit, and all the updated taxable value and state equalized value information. But the bonds are going to be outstanding for a number of years. So if I wanted to buy these bonds 5 years later, 6 years later, 10 years later, if I just go back to the original document, it's going to be, that information is going to be stale. A lot could have changed. Hopefully, things have continued to get better and would be more positive, but again, that information would be stale. So the market requires the township to update that information, at least some of the important financial information annually. So when the audit gets completed, then you're also going to file this updated financial information on a website that the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board has created called EMMA. If you're familiar at all with corporations, corporations file all their information on a website called EDGAR. This is kind of the sister to it. It's the Municipal Market Access System. So if you wanted to know anything about the township's bonds, if I was an investor, I can go on that website, click on the township, and it'll show all the information associated with that. So this just provides an ongoing update to that document. It refreshes it annually. And so the township doesn't have, you used to have that with some of your prior bond issues, but your most recent bond issues were sold either to the state through the drinking water program or directly to local banks where they don't require this annual finance, because there's no offering document in those circumstances. So this is something new that the township will have to undertake annually every year at the time that your audit's completed. But again, you're going to have the information readily available at your fingertips. So it's really just making sure that you put a process in place. But that's authorized pursuant to the resolution. Just to give you a sense of timing, our current schedule has us selling the bonds on August 14th at 1 p.m. So we will take care of publishing the notice of sale. That form is, a majority of this resolution is that notice. So if you wanted to really get a sense of what we're telling the market, that 7 pages in that resolution really kind of highlights the details of the transaction. But we'll get that published in the bond buyer. We'll receive bids at 1 p.m. on August 14th. We'll see whose bid produces the lowest true interest cost and award to them that day. And then bond proceeds, the closing is expected on September 4th. So that's when funds will be wired to the township into the construction fund. Covered a lot in a short period of time, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Collis?
You know, I just have one question. I have been meaning to ask this. What is the going interest rate in these type of things? I mean, I know you can't tell me specifically because we don't have the bids yet, but I'm just wondering what
So the rate does tend to fluctuate daily almost sometimes, but we just sold a deal earlier today that was a 15-year deal. Now, your bond issue is going to be a 20-year bond issue, but it sold at a 3.67% interest rate. So that was the overall true interest cost was 3.67. I would expect if the market stayed the same for the next month, because again, we're not selling until August 14th, that we would be somewhere around 4%, or maybe, hopefully, we would be somewhere right around or less than 4%. Again, the longer your bond issue is outstanding, the higher the interest rate, because the risk associated to the bondholder and having the debt outstanding longer.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions or discussion? All right. Let's see a second here. If I guess for a roll call?
Clerk Anzaldi?
Yes.
Treasurer Eckerton,
Yes.
Trustee Erda Thompson,
Yes.
Trustee Jasper,
Yes.
Trustee Braybeck,
Yes.
Trustee Mills,
Yes.
Supervisor Riley.
Yes.
Madam Supervisor, you have 7 yeas.
All right, thank you. Resolution passes. Thank you. All right, if I could ask for a motion for 13.2.
Madam Chair, move to receive the 2025 purchasing policy draft.
Second.
Okay, any discussion on this one? I know Clerk Lanzaldi's been very busy putting this together, working with Deputy Almacher.
I just want you to know that, the deputy supervisor and I have been kind of looking at some policies and thinking they need updated or revisions. I do like to give the board enough time to review it if they want, and if they had any questions or concerns, either to ask me directly or to bring them at the board so that any changes could be made. And so that's why I bring them as you receive them, so that you have the whole, you don't have just the, we send out the packet on Friday, you have this
Limited
little
time,
time
yeah.
to look at it. So that's how I will handle, or that's how policies will be handled going forward, so. And for the purchasing policy, there were some changes. The kind of bigger changes that we have are outlined in the memo. We are raising some authorization limits. We're adding language regarding the federal grant. But other than that, it was mostly changes like grammatical errors and stuff like that. So it's all in the board memo. But if you have questions, let me know.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for all your work, Clerk Anzaldi.
Yeah, it was very helpful. Clerk Lanzaldi came to a department head meeting and worked with our department heads, talk things through, so very helpful. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, accept the grant draft there. Okay, if I will ask for a motion for 13.3.
Madam Chair, I move to receive the 2025 vote rules draft.
Oh.
Second.
Okay, in discussion, it's kind of the same thing.
It's more of the same thing. The board rules actually haven't been amended since 2013, so it was definitely time. There were some sections were moved as like really not necessary, like we've never done it. For example, there was a section in our board rules talking about how you can devolve into a committee as a whole, but we don't really do that. So some of that language was removed, some of the sections were clarified, and there were some stylistic changes and grammatical errors that were corrected. The biggest thing, though, in the board rules that I would like to mention is the agenda will be a little bit different. I worked with the supervisor's office and to determine, hey, can we do this better? So there will be a little change in the order of the agenda if it's adopted at the next meeting. Okay?
All right,
Thank you.
so we're
Thank
going to look at that more, and I will go ahead and ask for, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we'll receive the draft. And now I will ask for a motion for 13.4.
Madam Chair, I move to go into closed session as authorized by Michigan Open Meetings Act for the following reasons. Pursuant to MCL 15-2681E, to consult with the Township Attorney regarding trial or settlement strategy in connection with Pittsfield Plaza Partners LLC versus Pittsfield Township, Michigan Court of Appeals case 373279 and 373277, because a discussion in open session would have a detrimental effect on the litigation or settlement position of the township, and pursuant to MCL 15.268C for strategy and negotiation sessions connected with the negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement.
All right, can I ask for a voice call on this one?
We have a second.
Oh,
Second.
sorry, second. I keep
Second.
thinking that's going to happen. Okay. Now a voice call.
Treasurer Eckerton,
Yes.
Trustee Erda Thompson,
Yes.
Trustee Jasper,
Yes.
Trustee Braybeck,
Yes.
Trustee Mills,
Yes.
Supervisor Riley,
Yes.
Clerk Lanzaldi.
Yes.
Madam Supervisor, you have 7 yeas.
All right, we'll go ahead and move into closed session. We'll reconvene once we're completed.